Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Feedback Loop here on Studio Live today for yet another week. I hope you've all had a great week. It is the weekend here. It is Sunday morning here in beautiful, sunny, very sunny at the moment, Adelaide, South Australia. Wherever you are in the world, let me know if you're here on the live chat. If you've made it here live and you want to hear all about mixing, which is our topic of today that we'll jump into in just a moment, then let me know how you're doing, where you are in the world, and what it's like over there this time of year. I know for my American, Canadian, and European friends, it's pretty darn cold. And for anyone like me over here in the Southern Hemisphere, we're enjoying a nice summertime. So what are we talking about today? Who am I? What is this all about? Well, my name is Pete. This is Studio Live today, where my goal, my mission, my passion is to help you create, record, and release your best music. And I do that by creating my best music, or hopefully what is my best music, and I've been doing this for a bit over 3 years now. And what I do is I bring you along for the ride because I'm a regular musician, I'm a music creator, I'm a songwriter, and a lot of other folks are in the same boat as me. And you're trying to get your best music out there, and there has never been a better time to create, to mix, to master, to release your own music. So that is what I'm all about and what we're all about here on Studio Live today. We've got a few folks who are here already, so I'll say the quick customary hellos and then we'll jump straight in. So hello to Amaracia, we've got Dalen on here, we've got Patrick, Darren Bryant's here, ECBTV, David M from California, we've got Mr. Higgy Drums up there in Canada, and we've got, yes, from America, Amaracia, and Benedict Stewart. Hello, welcome to you all here that are live. If you're not here live, then that is no problems at all. If you're catching up on the replay, then yeah, I hope that you get some value out of this. We're going to be talking mixing for the next hour, so we've got a lot to get through. I've got my notes. I've got old school. I've got my mind map of all of my notes here, so we'll be talking about a lot of stuff that I've got pre-prepared, but I also want your input. So if you are here live, or even if you're not, leave a comment after the video, because this is not going to be the end of this. Mixing is one of the questions, or how to mix is one of the questions I get probably more than any other question here on the channel. People want to know how to mix and how to get the best quality sounds out of what they do. Now today I'll be mixing in GarageBand on my iPhone because that's how I roll. I like using GarageBand, but the good thing about this is these principles are universal. So if you're a GarageBand user, great, you're probably going to get more out of this. If you're not, that's no problem either, because when you're talking mixing, when you're talking compression, you're talking EQ, you're talking effects and reverbs and delays, they're pretty universal. The concepts go across whatever you're using, whatever sort of DAW or digital audio workstation you're using. What we talk about here today is going to relate. So let's dive into it without any further ado. We'll have our customary drink of water, and then we'll dive in because we've got a lot to talk about here today, all about mixing. And I've tried to fix the audio sync, by the way. I know I talk about that every week, but it should be close. But when I switch to my other screen mode, sometimes my mouth will go out of sync. So apologies for that. I'll do the best I can with the internet connection we have here. So let's start with the basics, right? What is mixing and why is it important and why do we need to worry about it? Well, mixing is the part of the music creation process where we take recorded tracks of audio and we mix them together. We balance them. And in fact, mixing used to be called balancing. So mixing engineers used to be called balancing engineers because literally all they would do is balance the tracks. They'd make sure that the volume or the gain levels were right coming into all of the tracks, and then that would be recorded, because we didn't have wonderful things like multi-track recorders or the ability to overdub 32 tracks of audio. All the balance engineers would do is grab the violin sounds, and then they'll grab the horn section sounds, and they'll grab the string section sounds, and they'll bring that all together, make sure it's balanced so that the end listener who's spinning their gramophone record would be able to hear a quality mix. And the reason I mention that is that volume and balancing of volume is the number one thing to remember when you're mixing. So mixing, the number one important thing to remember is to balance your volume, balance your gain, and get your, what we call the dynamics. So the dynamics of your mix is number one, And in fact, there's only really two things when it comes to mixing. If we're going to break it down at a high level, with your mixing, you've got your dynamics, which is your volume, your EQ, your compression, the actual volume and gain shifts that you have throughout your song. That includes automation of volume. We'll talk about all these things. If these terms don't mean anything to you, don't worry, we'll cover them all. And then you've got your, what I call the flavor of the mix. And yeah, you could call this effects, you could call this plugins, whatever you want, but anything that actually flavors or changes the sound is kind of the secondary thing. So they're the sort of two main topics that we're going to cover when we talk about mixing. And this video is going to break down to, the first section is going to be a little bit more theory. So it's going to be my mug here talking to you for a little while just about some of the concepts. And then what we'll do is I'll bring up my current project, the song that you heard at the start, which is my new song called 6 and 8. And we'll dive into that and I'll show you some of the mixing that I've been doing, some of the mix decisions and how to. So it'll get very practical. So there should be something here for everyone. If you want to know more about the theory, you want to know some more about the concepts of mixing and what I recommend and what I use, we'll be covering that in the first half. And then we'll jump across and we'll do some really practical stuff. If you're watching on the replay, I'll try to remember to put a time code down in the description. So if you just want to jump straight into the practical, you're like, Pete, I know all this stuff, then you can jump straight to that. The other thing I'll say to those folks who are live here is if you do have questions about mixing or your own feedback, I'm not the ultimate expert in everything. 100% need and want your feedback, your questions, and your tips because, like I mentioned at the start, I'm still in the learning phase. Mixing is a learning experience, and we'll get to some of my mixing tips, but I'll preempt one, a bit of a spoiler here. One of the biggest tips I have is to mix often and mix a lot. So just mixing different songs, different types of music, your music, other people's music, and doing it every day. It's like a skill. It is a skill. You want to get good at mixing, then you want to mix every day. That's how you learn any skill, and that's how you get better through experience. Because you'll start mixing your songs, and they might be really bad. In fact, they probably will sound bad. I think Amaracia here was saying in the chat before the show, was saying, oh, I hope I get something out of this because I suck at mixing. You know what? Everyone sucks at mixing, and everyone starts at zero. So everyone, when they're mixing their first song, has mixed 0 songs. But then once you've done 10, 20, 50, 100, you should start to see that you're improving, you're getting better, your mixes are getting better because you're actually practicing. And that is the key thing, is to do things a lot, whether it's playing guitar, whether it's recording, whether it's mixing, whatever it is, do it a lot and you are going to get better results. Excuse me. So thank you also. Hello to Ethan, who is here as well. Kenneth Briggs is here, and we've got two Kenneths that we have here on the channel listening in as well. So let's dive in now and talk a little bit more about mixing. So what is it we've covered? How do you actually mix? Well, that's the practical side that we'll get into. But in essence, what you want to do is you want to take your hopefully really well recorded tracks that you have, and then you're going to mix them. You're going to balance them through volume, compression, and EQ, because they're all just volume knobs, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then you want to flavor them through effects, through reverb, through delay, through any of your effects that you may want to make your sound different. But the key thing about mixing is that there's kind of two approaches to this, and I used to be the first way, and now I'm the second way. So maybe if you're here live, let me know which way you go towards. So when I learned how to record, it was like this, right? You want to record everything 100% clean. So you got a guitar signal, you want to record it clean. Your vocals, record it clean. No compression, no EQ, no delay, no reverb on your tracks as you're recording them. You then want to get that beautifully even recording, flat everything, and then you want to do your mixing. So your mixing is the only time. Once you start mixing, that's when you start adding any effects. You start adding EQs, you start changing around things. That's sort of one way, and that's, in my view, a little bit of the old school approach. What I do now, and what a lot of people tend to move towards, is mixing as they go, which means that if you're recording a vocal and you've thrown some delay and some reverb on there, you've probably done that because it sounds good and it fits the song. So when you're actually recording that, have your mix decisions in mind. So as you're recording each track and as you're having your tracking session, think about how you want that song to sound at the end, because it's going to mean that that mixing process you have at the end is probably going to be like 1 hour instead of 10 hours, because every time you're recording a track as you go along, you're like, oh, let's just balance that out. Let's just add a little bit of extra delay on that vocal. Let's just add a little bit of extra reverb to that guitar. And eventually you're going to have this sort of pre-mixed, like your static mix that you have at the end of your tracking session. You're going to go, hey, that's a pretty good sound. And I'm actually going to show you in this video the difference between not doing that and doing that, because I've grabbed my track here and I've removed all of the effects that I put on as I went along. And yeah, there's a difference, and it's probably not as stark a difference as I even thought it would be, but there is a very different. Excuse me. And David's saying, yeah, a wet and dry mix. So yeah, whether you're recording everything dry, what we call dry, which is just no effects, no processing at all, or whether you're actually recording it wet or having your signal recorded. And you can then change it, like unless you're actually literally using external gear and recording it in with the effects, you can change it after the fact and adjust your plugins and EQ, and which we'll get to in a moment as well. So that's probably the how you mix question. Is what we'll cover there. Now I've got 5 tips. So 5 tips for mixing. So if you've got your notepad, if you're like me, if you're old school and you've got your notepad here, or if you've got some sort of digital thing, you might want to note these down and then add to them. Then let me know what your tips are, because there's more than 5 tips that result in a good mix. So the number 1 tip that I have for mixing is this: it is to mix with these, not these. So we all use digital audio workstations, DAWs, and they give us this beautiful visual representation of what we're mixing. Up there on the screen, you can see exactly what you're mixing, and you can look at things like EQ, and you can look at spot frequencies, and you can look at your VU meter, and you can see where is that troublesome frequency, and you can drop it down. All of that is good, but those are just tools to help your ears determine if it's a good sound. So I'll say that again, your visuals are just tools to help your ears, who are the final decision makers. Your ears should be telling you, is this sounding good? Is this the right thing for the mix? Because one of the biggest beginner mistakes I see folks make is that they'll watch a tutorial, or they'll watch one of my videos, and then they'll go, oh, when Pete EQ'd that, he dropped this EQ down here. And people ask me this question, they're like, what should my compressor settings be? And I'm like, unless I've heard your track, I've got no idea what your compressor settings should be, because it depends on the type of voice, the volume of the vocal going in, the gain that you had on your interface going in. There's too many variables to say this is what you do. But if you just listen and close your eyes, if you have to, close your eyes and listen, and then just go, okay, what does this need? What am I hearing too much of? What am I hearing too little of? What do we need to enhance? So that's sort of number 1 tip for mixing, is mix with your ears, not with your eyes. Number 2, and this is related, and that is this: if it sounds good, it is good. So people get hung up on mixing, and they're like, oh, I've got this mix and it sounds good, but I need to EQ this guitar. And I'll say, why do you need to EQ that guitar? And they'll go, well, because you have to EQ things, yeah? Like, I have to go in there and see which frequencies are good and bad. And I'll say, what frequencies are standing out to you as bad right now? And if you can't answer that question, if you don't know what's wrong, then chances are nothing's wrong. So you don't need to go in there and do too much to it, which we'll talk about more in a minute. If it's sounding good, then it is good. So trust your ears and trust what you want the music to hear. And again, especially if it's your music, it's your music. So other people's opinions are important. Get feedback. I always recommend getting feedback. But at the end of the day, it's your music. It's your opinion is number 1. And it's your ears that you want to listen to. You want to create tracks that you want to stick on your headphones when you're out and about listening to your own music. So make music for yourself. Make it sound good. All right, tip number 3. Why do I have this highlighted? Yeah, I'll just save that one to last. I've already talked about tip number 3. That is to mix often. So just to get into the practice of mixing, mix other people's songs, ask other people for their sessions. If anyone asks me for my sessions, I hand them straight over, because other people remixing your sessions can help me out, but it can also help you out. And grab other mixers. There's heaps of people, like Warren Hewitt has courses like this, Joe Gilder, Home Studio Corner, Graham Cochran. All of these folks have different ways. If you join their mailing list, they'll send you the stems, they'll send you their tracks, and you can mix other people's music. And it's amazing how much you can learn just by doing a whole lot of mixing of your own stuff and other people's stuff as well. So mix often, mix a lot. Tip number 4, reference your mixes. What do we mean? What does referencing a mix mean? Well, referencing is taking your mix and listening to it on pair of headphones like these ones. These are the Sennheiser HD280. These are a nice big closed back headphone. Grab a pair of earbuds. I don't know where my earbuds are. Here they are. Grab a pair of earbuds and listen on those. Excuse me. Take your mix out to your car. Take it to your home stereo. Grab a Bluetooth speaker and play your mix. Play it through just your iPhone speaker. And what that's going to do is it's going to tell you how your mix translates. Your mix may sound awesome on your headphones. And a classic example is that I was just playing my latest mix and I'd been mixing it on my earbuds. I came back and played it on here, and as you'll hear in a little while, the bass is too heavy. We've got too much bass in the mix because I was listening on little itty earbuds. They're very different. Earbuds. So if you're finding that that's the thing and your mixes are not translating, you've got too much bass, too little bass, it's just sounding muddy when you listen on really high quality, clear speakers, then maybe you need to go back and make some changes to your mix. So that is the other thing that I'll throw out there. Excuse me, sorry. Frog in my throat today. And the fifth tip, and the reason, so you might have noticed, I've called these my tips for mixing. So this is my advice. These are things that are going to get you started. What I haven't said is that these are my rules for mixing. The reason for that is that it's kind of like Fight Club. The first rule of Fight Club is there is no Fight Club. The first rule of mixing is that there are no rules of mixing. Now, people will debate me on this, and people will actually say, no, the rule is you must cut, do a low cut on all of your instruments that aren't your bass. That's a rule. You have to do that every time. The rule is that you can't, well, okay, I was about to say the rule is don't clip your signal and don't distort, which I like to make sure that people don't do, but hey, maybe that's what your music wants. Maybe that's what you want to do with your music. The thing is, if it sounds good, it is good, and there's no one way to do things. And that's the thing. I watch a lot of videos and I see a lot of tutorials and I read a lot of feedback, a lot of comments, and people say, you always have to, you must do this, you need to do this. And I'm kind of eliminating that. In 2019, I'm saying it's the year of eliminating the must and the have to and the need to. And let's go with the, here's an idea, here's a concept, here's something to try. Because until you try it, you're not going to know. Like some of the best music, some of the best sounds that have been created in the last 10, 20, 50 years have been done through experimentation. Like when, who's that, Sylvia Massey, when she records a Tool album and drops a piano from a 4-story building and that crashes to the ground and then that's sitting underneath your Tool mix, who would have thought that that's a good idea? Is that the rule for mixing? You must drop a piano and record the sound of a piano falling 4 stories onto your song? No. But are Tool an awesome band that have beautifully produced records? Yes, I believe they are. They're one of my favorite bands. So yeah, don't go with the must, don't go with the rules. Make sure that you know, like listen to advice, listen to people's feedback, but don't go in saying, I must do this, because that's the quickest way to fail, is to try and replicate exactly what someone else's process is. Take all the advice you get from other people, use what you can, and then move on and make and create your own process. It's the only way that you're going to create your best music and your best mixes. All right, time out for a quick drink there. Alrighty, I think we're getting close to, I didn't think we'd need this, we're getting close to the point where we can actually load up and play some music, listen to some tracks, but let's check back in with our folks here on the live stream and see what is going on. Mr. Ponk80 is here. Wouldn't be a stream without Mr. Ponk80. Jay Riley has a question here, which we'll get back to in a moment. David M. We've got Getelephon. Hello to you, and welcome to the stream here. So Jay Riley, do you know how to EQ and compress basses like the 808? Yeah, so the 808 is an interesting one. So short answer is no. I don't use a lot of 808 type bass in my tracks because I produce a lot of rock and pop and folk type music, and the 808 just doesn't really sit in that sort of genre. But from what I have done in terms of electronic music, most of your 808 samples are actually samples of what has already been pretty heavily EQ'd or compressed to begin with. So that's probably my first thing to say, is that like most things, don't just by default go ahead and start playing with things. If you put the sample on, especially if you're using a virtual instrument like something in GarageBand that I use, where you bring up an 808 kick or an 808 sound, then just see what it sounds like first. Definitely don't start adding bass until you've actually checked what it sounds like in your mix. And one of the points that wasn't in my tips here, but probably should have been, and in fact, I think I've got it as like my golden rules at the end, but spoiler alert, we'll jump to it, which is don't mix in isolation. So don't mix soloed, and you'll hear and see when we look at my track that I do solo tracks sometimes just to hear what they're sounding like and make sure that they're working okay and hear some of the detail. But when you're actually adjusting your volume, looking at your compression, your effects, do all of that with everything. So, because your listener is not going to go and solo out your tracks. So I know that didn't really answer your question around the 808 particularly, but I guess go in like you would with anything else, which is that don't just do things by default. Listen to it first, add your sound, and then go, does that actually need more bass, or is it too bass heavy? Like is the sampled version already too extreme on the bass, and I need to actually carve a little bit of that out. And the other tip around that is less is more when it comes to mixing. If you're more mixes that I've heard sound too intense and too muddy as opposed to too sparse. And the reason for that is most people, when they start out, they get a bit gung-ho, and every time they do an EQ move, it's to increase. They want to pump up the EQ. They want to, I don't have enough treble in that, I'm going to boost the treble. I don't have enough bass, I'll boost the bass. Cut before you boost is the other, not rule, but tip that we have for mixing. And that is to, if you are trying to get a better sound, especially when it comes to EQ, which we'll talk about in more detail soon, when it comes to EQ and getting a better sound, reduce the volume before you increase the volume. So if you are finding that, there's too much bass in this, then, wrong way around. I want more bass in this, maybe cut some treble. I want more treble, maybe cut some bass. So maybe look at your cuts before you look at your boost. Otherwise, everything starts competing. And I think David M, I leave a decibel or two for headroom. How about your mix? So leaving headroom in your mix, not having everything pumping and putting right up to that 0 dB level, which on the iPhone in GarageBand is really hard to determine. So I just tend to leave everything a little bit quieter than what I would think, because the end of your mix, if you want to master it especially, you need to have a little bit of headroom there. So cutting things as opposed to boosting them helps, because as soon as you start boosting, you've probably noticed this. You go into your EQ, everything's looking right, you do a few boosts, and then you come back out, and suddenly your VU meters are like popping up against the red because you've increased the volume of that track, because EQ is just a volume knob. Compression is just a volume knob. They just happen to have fancy names and can do some more fancy stuff. Keep that in mind as you are heading along. Alrighty, let's dive into a little bit more. Bernie is here too. Hello, greetings from Austria again. Like your videos, and Dan Baker's. Yeah, Dan Baker. Dan Baker is the man. I've said before, when I grow up, I want to be Dan Baker. He's just an amazing. If you're not subscribed to Dan Baker, find him now. Well, don't do it now. Do it at the end of this video. Go to YouTube, type in Dan Baker, watch all of his tutorials and his cool instructional videos. He is a beast when it comes to knowing his theory, knowing his musicianship, and knowing how to do everything when it comes to music. Alrighty. Excuse me. Well, let's just check through my notes here again. Like I said, I'm going old school today. I've got the pen and paper. We've talked about mixing, what it is, how do we do it. I've given you my 5 and 7 tips now for mixing, and we'll conclude that at the end as we round out the day. But let's go into a little bit more detail about the mix. And when we jump into GarageBand, which we'll do in just a couple of minutes, I promise you, what you'll notice is that there's 2 main topics that we talk about. And I covered this at the very start, but for those who were not paying attention or have only just joined us, the 2 things that we look at in mixing are dynamics and what I call flavor, we could call effects. So dynamics is just a fancy word for your volume, and gain is also just a fancy word for volume. So your dynamics is your volume, your compression, and your EQ. They're the key components to getting your volume sitting right. You've got flavor or effects, which are things like your reverb, your delays, then your chorus, your phaser, your everything else that you add in there. And the reason I mention them and I say them in that order is that is the order of importance. I see a lot of folks jump in and start throwing effects at their mixes before they've got a good quality static mix, before they can actually say, yes, my mix is balanced. And what then happens is that your ear kind of gets fooled by all of these effects going on, and you can't even hear if you've got a good balance. So looking at our mix, dynamics, sort of phase 1, and then flavor is phase 2. But again, don't be afraid, and I know I'm contradicting myself here, I do that a lot. Don't be afraid to actually mix on the way in and get a good quality sound recorded, even if you've got some reverb and a little bit of reverb, delay, EQ already on there, if it's what the track needs, if it's something that you want. Amarastia says, something I noticed is that without any EQ or compression changes, if you add the heavy guitar in the app, it often makes it nearly impossible to mix the song decently, as it just sounds like static. Yes, beware the distorted sounds, the heavy sounds, and we'll show you this when I get into my track here, especially your drums and your bass and your guitars. They are tracks that will boost your volume, they'll hit your compressor. GarageBand in particular has an auto limiting feature, and you'll get this pumping sound, which means that whenever your kick drum or your bass drum hits, or whenever a big guitar chord hits, everything else ducks because it's hitting the top, and so it's compressing and limiting the rest of your track. So definitely in your mixing, if you're finding you're getting that pumping, turn everything down. Too many people have their faders pushed right up to the top. Don't be afraid. You're not less of a person if your faders are sitting halfway up. In fact, it means you're going to get a good quality mix. And as David said before, you're going to get some headroom in your mixes. You're going to be able to mix more effectively, and then you can master your track, which we're not talking about mastering today, but we'll touch briefly on as we get to the end. All right, I've teased enough that I will be actually bringing up this track. So let's now do that. I just need to go down here and screen share over to my PC. Oops, that's the wrong one. I'm sharing it to my Apple TV in the lounge room. That's really going to help out. I'm sure my child is loving that. She's like, hey, what happened to my episode of The Simpsons? It's now Dad's song. Okay, we've got that up on there, and I just need to unplug and replug my lead here so that we're playing it through my mixer, not through the AirPlay. Don't you love this? This is all great. Oh, and I realized I've got this weird line that's going on. I usually have a little thing over the top of the camera that stops that light, so apologies for that. If you're a little bit obsessive compulsive like me and that is annoying you, then I apologize for that. All right, here is my track. Now I had all these vocals muted because I played this at the start of the show. So this is my song. This is the song that I have here called 6 and 8. I'll be doing a heap of videos on this all through the week, and there's a playlist which I'll link down in the description after this. So if you haven't been following along and you want to catch up on all the different videos, because I'll reference a lot of what I've done, because as I mentioned, I mix a lot on the way in these days. So a lot of this stuff has already been done, and we'll just sort of be reviewing where it's at the moment. And as you're listening, I know it's through YouTube audio, streaming audio, which is even lower quality, but it should hopefully sound okay. Let me know if you're hearing things, because I'm basically a day away from having this ready to master. So if you're hearing things that you think should be different or that you think should be changed, then let me know. But let's just do a quick test play of the start of this track and make sure that the audio is coming through and you can get a little bit familiar with the type of track. This is my song 6 and 8. Mother told me, son, you'd better dance while you've got the chance and have the talent. Okay, so that's what our song sounds like. You can hear there quite a lot of reverb and delay, especially on that vocal sound there. It's probably a little bit muddy. I've probably got some EQing to do to remove some of that mud because it was all just mixed on the way in as we go. And we'll go through now and we'll take you through each of these tracks and how I recorded them, because mixing, part of the recording process is, and Joe Gilder from Home Studio Corner, the t-shirt I'm wearing right now, says this, which is get it right at the source. So if at all possible, if you get your sound sounding right going in, then your mixing job is going to be so much easier to do. And I'll show you that when we flip over, and I'll show you the version with no effects when we get to that section. But recording the tracks well, getting a good quality recording, especially for things like your guitars, acoustic guitars here, which I'm not super happy with. We'll get to that in a minute. And especially your vocals, the better the recording is going in, the easier it is to mix. So what do we have here? Excuse me. Well, we've got our drum track, which is this first track here, and I had a very detailed video where I went for about 30 minutes showing you how I created this drum track here in GarageBand using the drummer, the virtual drummer, which is a very, very cool feature. And yeah, you can check that out if you want more detail on that. The last video I did, I created this bass, which if we just solo this and take a quick listen, that was just our virtual bass. So that's our touch bass on autoplay. I was going to re-record it. I never got around to it. So I used our little trick where we take the regular virtual touch bass here and we merge it, and then we reamp it through a bass amp, which we did here. So I think the bass is sounding pretty good now. We're going to go with it for the time being, or well, probably forever. We got a couple of MIDI instruments. So the reason I'm using this track is that we're mixing virtual drums, we're mixing auto-played reamped bass, we're mixing some piano and some clarinet, so we're mixing some virtual MIDI instruments, and then we're mixing a whole lot of our actual recorded instruments. So here is my, so we'll take a quick listen to these. So the piano is sounding a little bit like this. So it's doing mostly just chord stabs throughout most of it. Gets a little bit more complex at the end. The clarinet sound is this bit at the start that you would have heard doing a little lead open. So just a complementary melodic instrument that we have going throughout the track. We then have our acoustic guitars. So I've got two acoustic guitars here. We've got these. We'll go into our mixer icon here. By the way, this is if you're new to mixing in GarageBand and this is going a bit fast for you in terms of where I'm jumping around, there's a heap of videos sort of more beginner level, I guess, in terms of mixing, or entry level. So if you do want more information about how I'm doing this and where I'm getting to these, trial and error is your friend. Just experiment. You can't break too much, especially if you've got a backup copy of your track. And yeah, check out some of the other videos as well. So we've got one guitar here panned hard left and one panned hard right. You can see the volumes there are slightly different because here's the first mistake I made. I said get it right going in. What you'll notice is that this first track is actually at a slightly higher volume than this second track. So I either had the input gain on my preamp a bit higher, which I think is the problem that I had on the microphone that I was recording this, or perhaps I was too close to the microphone on that first recording. So I have had to balance those tracks out. So those soloed at the moment sound like this. And let's pause for a minute because this is part of the mixing decision, but it's also part of the recording decision I made. Why do I have two guitars? So why do I have a left guitar and a right guitar here on this track? It's to create a stereo field. So yes, you could have one guitar, put a stereo spread plugin on there and sort of stretch it out. But having the two different guitars, that yes, they're playing the same thing, but like a doubled vocal, which we've talked about before as well, a doubled guitar just will sound a little bit fuller and it gives you sort of more of a 3D. It's hard to explain, but it gives it a more depth into your sound to actually have one guitar on the left, one on the right, playing the same thing, panned hard left and hard right. It just means that it fills out that stereo spectrum better than having one right down the middle. And what I've actually used for simplicity on this track, because it's a low track count, and we'll pause on this to explain a concept, and that is LCR mixing. So let me know if you're here live, let me know how you mix. Do you use LCR? And I'll explain what that is in a minute. Or do you position your instruments right across the stereo field? So if you are first getting into music, I like LCR because it means you've got three mixing decisions when it comes to panning. So when you come in here and you look at your panning, you're either panning in the middle, you're panning hard right, or you're panning hard left. There's no in between. You're not putting anything just here, you're not putting anything just here. You're going hard left, hard right, or right in the middle. It just makes your mixing decisions a lot easier because you're not having to work that out, and it gives you a more balance. If you just make sure the same amount of stuff generally is on the left as is on the right, you'll end up with a more balanced signal. There's nothing worse than listening to a song and it's really like, it's just leaning to your left ear or your right ear and it doesn't sound right. You want as close to a balance. And yes, you can have little bits that come in and out and the left and right. That adds a lot of variety. But if your whole time you kind of feel like your head's tilted because all of the track is on one side, that can get distracting. So there's a panning mix tip. And panning is part of our dynamics because, again, your pan button is really just telling it how much volume in the left channel and how much volume is in the right channel. So panned left, 100% volume on the left, 0% on the right. Pan hard right, 100% on the right, 0% on the left. Now, there's one thing to keep in mind here when it comes to this, and you may be able to hear this in the video, but if I just play the left one, hopefully you'll hear this on your left channel. You know what? I think, have I got my headphones on the right way around? I do. Let's just do a quick adjustment here. I'm just going to turn this volume down. You know what I've done? I have plugged in into my mixer. This is an easy enough thing to do, but I've got the left channel in the left and the right channel. No, other way around. Left in the right, right in the left. Let's turn this back up and see if we fixed it. That is better. Now, if you're listening on headphones, you can probably hear that there is a little bit of sound in the right ear. And this is a good concept to explain how tracks work in GarageBand in particular, but in a lot of digital audio workstations as well. That is that every audio recorded track is a stereo track. In fact, almost every type of track is going to be a stereo track. The reason for that is that, and you can see there, it's got the, you can pan it left and right, but it's going to give a little bit of that signal because I've got a stereo delay plugin on here. So some of the reverbs and some of the delays that you have on here are stereo effects. And as soon as you have a stereo effect, then it's going to go a little bit into the other ear as well. So if you're desperately trying to get something just in the left and you're like, why is there a bit in the right? It's probably because you've got some sort of plug-in that is putting some sort of stereo effect that's pushing a little bit of that to the right. Alrighty, so there are our two guitars. Now, I'm okay with how they sound. In a perfect world, I would have re-recorded them because it was a little bit scratchy on there. I think my mic position wasn't 100% where it needed to be, so not sounding as perfect, nothing's perfect, not sounding quite as good as I wanted it to be. Anyway, we're going to move on because we've got a lot to get through, and we've only got 24 minutes to do it. We have my lead vocal here. Now, this is the reason that this is all in pieces is that this is comped together. Comp just means compiling. So we've compiled this vocal together from a bunch of takes. So we had 3 takes of vocals originally. I've comped them together, and then here they are in this track here. I've got another track down here, which is another video I did where I showed how to put an effect on just a part of a track. And what I'll do is we'll play this excuse me, because this is part of sort of my mixing decision that I did on the way in again. So all I did here is I took one of my takes and I shifted it down here to this second track. And then on this track, we've poured on a heap of echo and reverb. We've really just dialed up all of the echo and reverb and compression on this track. So I'll play back just soloed these two, and you'll hear the transition between the first track, which is our lead vocal, and then when we get to this little a cappella section here. Dancing in 6 and 8 time. And then we pause and then. Now we're older, time is moving on. Like a distant song you don't remember. So that's that a cappella section. You can hear there the reverb is continuing to kick on. I don't want that level of reverb through the whole song, but I did want it on just this part of the track. So that's why we have that little section there on a separate track. And as I mentioned before, like we're turning the theory into the practice here. This is the reason why I said at the start why you actually want to get it right at the source and why you want to make sure that you're making some of these mix decisions early, is that you can make sure that you've got enough takes to do things like this. And when you're recording things like this, making sure that everything is sitting nicely in the mix is going to be important. I had another point to make and I completely spaced on it. I'm sure we'll come back to it at a later stage. So that's the rest of our vocal there. We've then got a heap of we've got a vocal double. So this is just in the choruses. We've got a vocal double. Now, what a vocal double is, if you haven't played with these before, it's a lower volume vocal that we have sitting below the main vocal that just complements that in the chorus sections or in sections where we want sort of twice the vocal. So let's just play back in the chorus here. Time after time we are standing in line and we're making the most of each rhyme. I'm happy to see that you're waltzing with me and when... So you can see there that when I put it up, it sounds like there's two of me singing. That doesn't sound good, but having it as a doubled vocal, just lower down at about half or even a third of the original volume, that does help our sound. It helps make it sound fuller and gives us a little bit more life. Foo Fighters, Dave Grohl, basically every chorus he's ever sung has got a doubled or tripled vocal because it really gives some pop and some punch to your chorus sounds. And then we have a whole bunch of backing vocals and complementary vocals down here, which we will talk about in more detail as we get to those. So that is the layout of the track as we have it. That is where we're coming from. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive in and show some of the concepts of the dynamics of some of the EQ and some of the other settings that I've used in this track, and hopefully give you some ideas for your tracks of how you can make them sound good. Let's just jump back and make sure no one's telling me that my audio sounds terrible over here. So we've got Barry Smith here, who says, did you finish up your new song? When will we have the master effect? Sorry, when When will we have a master effect where you could master all the track at once? Yes, I'll be doing the mastering very soon. So this is my mixing video. So I'm doing this live, and then the mastering video will be out in the next day or so. Hello to Gino, who's here late from Chicago. That's okay, Gino. You can catch up on the replay afterwards. We've got Aditya, who says hello, and we've got Mike Augustine. Hello, my man Mike. Welcome to you. And I've got a question here. Do you have a playlist for absolute beginners of GarageBand? I 100% do. It's called my GarageBand Quick Jams, and it is probably the best place to start. They're little bite-sized chunks of videos between 2 and 5 minutes, and each one explains just one concept. So if you watch one video, the idea is you watch one video, you learn how to use the keyboard, you go away, you experiment with the keyboard. You watch the next one, you learn how to use the strings, you go away and experiment with that. So if you search GarageBand Quick Jams, then you will find that playlist, and if I remember, I will link it at the end of the video as well. Alrighty, thank you again to those people who are here live. We'll jump back over to our video in progress here after a short break for a drink. Alrighty. And as we're going here, as I mentioned, any questions about this mix or any tips that you have or any ideas that you have of what I should and shouldn't be doing on this, then throw those in the comments as we go. I'm always happy to learn and be told that something I'm doing is right, wrong, or otherwise. All right, let's talk about this mix. Let's talk about some of the dynamics decisions that I made and that we have in this mix and what we've actually done. So I'll just check my notes here. So the first thing about dynamics is your static mix. So what you'll notice here is that all of my faders here are at different levels. We've got much lower levels down here for my backing vocals, and you can see that they were recorded at very low levels too. I probably should have normalized those by using the merge function. Again, if you want to learn how to do that to make those waveforms look easier to read, just search Pete John's merge, and you'll get all of my merge videos which show you how to merge and normalize the sounds there. So we have all of those. We've got our guitars, as I mentioned. We've got different volumes there. Our bass at that volume, and then our vocal. Our lead vocal here is the highest volume because that's what we want to be sitting and driving the mix. We want that to be sitting at the highest level in the mix so that it's going to be sounding the best that it can. So there's sort of our static decisions. Now there's two other ways that we can actually determine the level of our vocal. One of them is automation. So I haven't used automation in this track. I've got, and I'm not going to in this video, only because it'll probably take me the next 18 minutes to explain automation in enough detail. So I'm going to send you away if you want to learn about automating vocals. And what automating does is it means that we can actually change the volume up and down as we go. So if I wanted to use it on this vocal, I would tap here, I would tap automation, and then what it opens up is a volume curve here. If we turn on in the top left here, we can actually add in points, and then we can determine where we want that volume to go. So we can drop the vocal down in a certain section, we can pump it up. So if, for instance, we did want to go, this section is a bit too quiet, so we can increase the volume there, through there, and then it drops back down, but we want that to go really quickly back down. So you've got complete control over how your volume actually goes throughout your track. Now I'm going to turn that off because I don't want automation on this track for now, because I did I hope a decent job using the noise gate, which again, we talked about in a recent video, which is basically just filtering out whenever there's no sound or a low amount of sound so that we're not getting a lot of that breathing and things in there. And I use another method for some of my vocals, which I tend to use more these days, because the problem with automation is as soon as it's on there, you can't use your volume control anymore. So as soon as you've automated your volume, if we turn it back on like this, as soon as you've got automation on, then your volume goes like it's yellow. So we can't actually move that volume slider because we're adjusting our volumes all out here. And the reason we can't do that is otherwise your volume slider might send your automation to a level too high or too low. Like it won't actually work. So you need to do it there. So if I do any automation, I do it right at the end, right before mastering is when I'll do automation, because it just makes it too difficult to actually get your volume set correctly. Now there's ways around that. There's a method that a lot of folks use, which is using the EQ, which we'll talk about in a moment, using the EQ to actually change the volume. In fact, I'll show you that now, because that's a good tip. If you have done automation already, what you can do is if you go to your mixer here, you go to plugins and EQ, and we tap on visual EQ, over here on the right, we've got a volume or gain slider. So even if you've done automation and you want to say turn your volume up a little bit overall, you can still do it over here because your EQ actually has its own gain adjust. By the way, double tap is your friend everywhere. If you've changed things around and you want to get it back to normal, double tap it, and it's the same on most of your things. Double tap will take things back to 0 or unity level a lot of the time. So there's a couple of ways. We've got our automation, we've got our EQ setting there that we can adjust the volume. The other way that I use quite a lot these days is called clip gain. So what is clip gain and where would you use it? Well, I actually used it in this section here. So I played this before. The reason I played this before for you is that when I had this second vocal here, that I've increased the volume of, I still wanted to have my original vocals sitting underneath it, but at a lower volume. And I didn't want to at that point come in, do a bunch of automation, and then have to have that problem. So what I did is we used clip gain. So I tap on this one and I tap settings. And what you'll notice there is that gain is at -25. And the same with the next one. We've got, well, not quite, -24. If you compare that to the rest, they're at 0 dB. So all of our vocals, all of our clips are at 0 dB. But the beauty part is that when you split up a clip, you can actually go in and adjust its gain separately. Now, it won't change the waveform here. So you do have to be a little bit careful because sometimes you'll be playing back and you'll be like, why is this volume so low? What happened? And it's because you adjusted your clip gain, like I did there, that actually reduced that volume down. So that's something to keep in mind. You might be thinking at the moment, Pete, you're spending an awful lot of time talking about volume. Where do we get to the fun stuff? When can we start adding some effects and some EQ and some compression? Yeah, well, the reason I'm spending so much time on this is that this is super duper important. This is one of the more important parts of getting your mix sounding right is your static mix. And they're just some techniques that I use to get my static mix sounding about right. Okay, now that I've moved everything around and probably ruined my own static mix, we'll continue on with this. So we've talked volume. What about compression? People say to me, Pete, what's the best compression setting for vocals, for guitars, for whatever it is? So I'll show you a couple of these. So we'll show you my vocal compression first of all. So we'll come in here to the plugins and EQ. We'll scroll down to our plugins and EQ here and we'll tap on our compressor. So I've got videos all about the compressor, so if you want to learn about what all these settings do, I don't have the time today to tell you everything, except to say that the key things you want to look at are the top 3 there, which is your threshold, which is when the compressor will kick in. It is your ratio, which is how much compression will happen when the compressor kicks in, and your attack, which is how quickly the compressor kicks in. So I'll go through that again because that's important concepts to understand. Threshold, when will the compressor kick in? So if my threshold's all the way up here, it's never going to hit 0 dB. The compressor will just simply never kick in. We'll show you what I mean in a minute. So we want that to be down around about here where it's actually going to have a difference. Ratio, how much compression? So how much squashing is going to go on? Now this has automatic makeup gain in the compressor here. So it means that it's going to raise the volume, but compression actually squashes the volume. We don't have time to go into it, but trust me, it's basically squashing the peaks off and then pulling everything back up. And then attack, which is how quickly it's going to kick in. Once it kicks over that, so if you want it to compress straight away, as soon as it hits a peak, have that attack down low. If you want it to be a little bit slower, so you don't want it to be too aggressive, you can slide the attack out and you get a more mellow, less aggressive attack sound there. So that is what we've got on here at the moment. Let's come in here and do what I said not to do, which is solo our vocal, because you generally don't want to have things soloed, and just listen to this. And what I'll do is I'll switch around the compression and you'll hear the difference that it makes having the compressor there and not. While you've got the chance and have the talent. So let's turn the compressor off completely. But I would rather sit and play with toys and hang out with the boys. So you can hear it's adding a little bit of volume, but it's not just turning the volume up. The difference between a compressor and a volume knob is a compressor is only bringing the volume up when it's quieter. So it's kind of like a magic volume slider in that it's going to find those peaks, push them down, bring the quieter bits up. And that's what the job of a compressor is. So let me just show you this. So if I have the threshold at 0 when I play, there's going to be nothing. I'm going to dial this in and you'll hear the difference it makes. Boys and start some trouble. So she dragged me away, all the while trying. So you can hear there that, yeah, if you put the compressor all the way up, it's going to sound very aggressive and not so good. Now, I've just realized my noise gate's a little bit too sensitive even there too, because it was cutting out a little bit. So I'm going to drop that down a little bit, which is good. So sometimes soloing can help you pick up on things like that. What I'll do now, though, is let's bring the vocal back into the mix, and I'll turn the compressor off and on, and you'll hear the difference. And to say, son, there'll be time for all that. You better start dancing. Time we are standing in line and we're making the most of each ride. I'm happy to... So what the compressor is doing there, and what a lot of people, the terminology a lot of people use is it's cutting through the mix. So when people say to me, Pete, my lead vocal, it's not cutting through the mix, it's buried. It's buried in the mix. How do I get that? Well, it's compression. Compression will help bring the vocal up and make it more present in your mix. The opposite problem. People are saying, my vocal is sitting on top of my mix. Why can't I get the vocal to sit with the mix? You're probably over compressing. So compression just needs to be balanced in the middle there so that your vocal is present, but it's not too far on top of the mix that it's actually sounding like it's overpowering. So that's our vocal compression. Let's jump over excuse me, to our guitars, because guitars are the other instrument that I tend to compress a lot. And if we come into the compressor here, you can see I've got some reasonably aggressive compression on these two. Let's just play them. And let's just turn off the compressor on both of these and take a listen. Turn it back on. And with acoustic guitar in particular, compression is good. Don't use it too ridiculously heavily or you get some pumping, you get all the problems. But compression is good because the acoustic guitar, when you record it, it's a very dynamic instrument. So vocals and guitars, the reason I'm showing these for compression is that these are your most dynamic instruments that you're going to use, which means that they have loud louds and soft softs. Yeah. So what you want to do is balance those out, not to the point where they're squashed and everything's at the same volume, but you just want to enhance that to get everything balanced in the middle. So that's why I've used these. Yes, you can use compression on drums, keyboards, saxophones, whatever other instruments that you want, but we don't have the time here today to go into detail because we're already running a bit late. So that is compression in a nutshell, and hopefully that gives you some ideas. And again, the question of what compression settings should I put on my vocals is not the right question to ask. The right question to ask is, what compression does this vocal need in the context of this mix? So if you ask that question, instead of going, I saw Pete do this, or Patrick over on GarageBand guy did this, or Lewin over on GarageBand, GarageBand and Beyond did this. Yeah, look at what we did, but look at why we did it. Don't just look in isolation and say, this is the way to compress. Look at how do I compress to get the best sound. Okay, so we've talked about volume, we've talked about compression. What about EQ? Now, we are low on time, so we're not going to be able to go into a heap of detail about EQ, but that's okay because EQ is actually quite simple. EQ is something that we can actually... All EQ is, so let's break it down. Let's make it really super simple. What is EQ? It is a volume knob for different frequencies. So if we have our guitars here, I'll show you how I EQ'd my guitars. We'll come into the plugins and EQ, tap on visual EQ. So the EQ I have on my guitars here is that guitar is a mid-range instrument. So I have a small boost in the mid-range. I have a boost in the bass frequencies because the microphone I used was a large diaphragm condenser microphone and it made the guitar sound a bit tinny. So I added a little bass, but what I also did is I cut the treble. So what I'll do is we'll play just one of these guitars. I will solo it and I'll bring it into the center just so that we can hear it a bit better. And... so that's what it sounds like at the moment. If we come into here too, and let's turn off our EQ, and I'll turn it off and then turn it back on, and you'll hear the difference between the original recording and then with the EQ. So you can hear there that it's bringing a little bit more bass. And if anything, what I'll probably do, I'll take my own advice here and I'll cut that bass that I put in there and I'll cut a little bit of this boost. You only need small boosts here and just leave that the same because I think I actually gave it a little bit too much there. Let's try that. Yeah, so I think I removed too much of the top end. So there you go. We'll just replicate that over on this one so that we remember what we did. So this is what we're talking about. It's a lot of trial and error when it comes to doing these sort of things. But yeah, back to my point. All we're doing here is saying that at this frequency, at the frequency 182 hertz, we've increased the gain by 2.5 or 3 dB there. We've got a boost here. We've got 1.5 dB of gain at, let's make that at 1,000 hertz. And then we've got minus 4 dB up here at like 11,000 hertz. So all that's saying is turn up the bass a bit, turn up the mids a little bit, and turn down the trebles. So people get hung up on how you EQ and what the perfect EQ curve is. And you know, GarageBand only has a 3-band EQ. And it's a very basic and simple EQ, but I kind of like it, especially when you're starting out and you're starting your mixing journey, because you can go nuts. Like there's 12-band EQs and people have got these EQ curves that go all over the spot. And then I'm like, can you just take that EQ off for a minute? And they do. I'm like, does that sound better or worse? And they're like, it sounds a bit better. I'm like, okay, so your EQ, you're not doing what EQ is supposed to do, which is do no damage. You're supposed to improve upon the sound by adding EQ. If your EQ is damaging your song, if it's making it sound worse, then it's not the right thing for the song. So that is our dynamics. Now I've realized that I've left us 5 minutes for, having, we're talking about the flavor for the effects. So we're not going to have a whole heap of time to dive into the effects, which is probably okay because effects are, again, in a song like this are pretty simple. And I'll show you in just a couple of minutes what I've used here. So the echo and reverb that we have here is our master effects. And I've got a heap of videos that are all about effects, which I'll try and find a link below. So what I've used here is triplet echo as my master effect. Because it's in 6 and 8 time, triplet echo is the one that I've used there. And I've used the large hall reverb. And what my technique is, I guess, for this sort of thing is I tend to use the master effects more than I do the actual individual track effects. The reason being that if you think of the purpose, and we're going to keep it very high level here, and maybe we need another video next week where we dive into just effects and how to use all the different effects. And that might be a good idea for next weekend's video. But I'll give you these basic tips with effects is the reason that delay was originally came about because of like tape delay. So, you know, it's probably more of an artificial sort of sound. So if you're using delay, use it sparingly, use it on vocals, use it on guitars. That's what I tend to use it. If you're looking at reverb, reverb actually came out of actual natural spaces. The reason reverbs are called things like club, small hall, large hall, church hall, is that reverb is a sound that is in nature. So if you go into a canyon and you yell out, it's going to echo back at you. And that's sort of that sound is what we know as reverb. So if you're mixing a track, what you'll notice here is that I've got a very similar sort of, well, I'm using the same reverb and I've dialed it in, you know, very extreme for that backing track there. I've dialed it into all of these tracks and I'm using the same one. And the reason for that is you want to create, the way that I use reverb, especially for a track like this, is you want it to sound like you're actually in a space, in a real space, and that all the instruments are in that space. So you want you to sound like your guitars, your drums, not so much your bass. Bass you don't want a whole lot of reverb on, but you want to make sure your instruments are sounding like they're syncing together, that they're in the same space, and that they're actually sounding unified. And that's the way that I use reverb. Now, we don't have a heap of time, as I said, to go into much more detail than that, except to say that using your master reverb there is good. Your plugins and EQ here, this tends to be, once you've got your static balance, I'll come in here and I'll start adjusting and tweaking. And in fact, let's just show you, because I did prepare a little demo earlier, which is what this song sounds like with no effects at all. So what I've done in this version of the track is that I have removed everything. I've removed all of the EQ, I've removed all of the compression, I've removed every reverb and echo and delay plugin that we have, and we'll take a listen to what it sounds like. So let's just come up here to our chorus and just take a quick listen. Mother told me, son, you'd better dance while you've got the chance and have the talent, but I would rather. So it doesn't sound bad, yeah? It sounds okay, but it sounds a bit dry, it sounds a bit flat. And in fact, what I'm probably hearing from that is I've gone a little bit overboard on the effects and some of the moves that I've made here. So maybe I just need to dial things back a bit, because that didn't actually sound too bad. Let's play that same section here with all of our effects and all of our other settings in here. Mother told me, son, you'd better dance while you've got the chance and how. And yes, our audio is not playing nicely. It started going a little bit crackly there as we went. So I think the stream is saying, Pete, you've been streaming for an hour now. You've been going too long, so maybe you need to call it a day pretty soon. So as I mentioned, that's not giving you a whole lot in terms of how to use effects, and we'll revisit that at a later stage. But we'll finish off there in terms of what we're looking at here on the screen. We'll just bring myself back over to not that one, to that one, and I'm just going to send this away. Stop mirroring my phone there. Alrighty, I will jump back over to the chat here and see what I've missed, because I've probably missed a whole lot of stuff here, and I have, yes. So we'll jump back here. We've got a few questions. We are going to go a little bit overtime here, so we'll probably have about 5 minutes of overtime happening here. So we've got Basil, who says, I still don't understand how we use the multi-tracking recording. What's the difference between having it activated or not? So multi-track recording, unless you have a multi-channel interface, is not really going to do anything. Multi-channel recording is where you've got something like a Steinberg UR12, which I think Barry Smith is asking about in a moment, and you've got two things plugged in. So you've got your guitar in one and a vocal mic in another, and you record those two tracks at the same time. Otherwise, you're doing what's called overdubbing, which is just recording one track and then recording another track over the top. So you don't need that multi-track recording unless you've actually got a device that can support it that you'll be using. Barry Smith, I had a Steinberg UR12. Do I have to install the driver on the Interpaper Oracle? I hook it up to the Apple camera adapter. How can I hook it up to my iPad? And will it work? I can't quite read all that question. Steinberg UR12, it will work out of the box if you hook it straight up to the camera adapter, but it does need power. So you need to power it from the USB, either through a power outlet or through a battery pack, like a USB power bank. So I've got videos about how to do that. If you search Pete Johns Steinberg UR12, you'll be able to find those. Bold Soja for Christ, for Pete's sake. I love this person. Every time I put a video out, he's like, for Pete's sake. I'm like, yeah, I love it. James Oral, a bit late, but hello. Yeah, I wish you could turn off the makeup gain. So we're talking about compression. Yes, I wish we could turn off the makeup gain in compression. I wish we could turn off the auto-limiting function in GarageBand. So that's probably a good thing to mention, actually. So thanks for the reminder there, James. When you are mixing in GarageBand, the reason I didn't talk about sort of your main, you don't have a main mix bus in GarageBand, so you can't actually see what you're peaking at. But what GarageBand will do is it kind of turns all your volumes up to be at close to 0 dB. So the reason I say don't push your individual tracks up is that when you're doing that, when you're pushing your individual tracks up, it will put your overall track really loud, and then it kind of compresses it down to 0 dB, which means if you want to master the track, which we'll talk about in another video, if you want to master your track, which just means to sweeten the mix, make it radio ready, then you can't, there's not any headroom to actually do that. So yes, I too wish that you could do that. Guitelephone, the guitar sounds so good. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Ponk 80, what is sub bass? That is when you have, oh. Ponk 80, I think this is a joke. What is sub bass? That is when you are having for dinner on a submarine. Yeah, okay. I think I missed something in the reading of that. I'm clearly not a good one. Clearly not. I shouldn't quit my day job and become a comedian. But yes, it is anything under 20 hertz, which is what James has responded with there. Darren, how would you approach a vocal track that you wanted to be very dynamic in quiet in a particular spot? Very dynamic and quiet in a particular spot. So yeah, if you've got, say, a big mix and then you want it to really sort of ramp down, the key is there that you might want to use what we had before, which is having two different tracks. So you may want your quieter vocal that you want to be really dynamic to be on a second track, because you may want a lot of compression when the rest of the band is kicking in, and then you may want to reduce the amount of compression to increase the dynamic range when you're just having that vocal sort of by itself or in that quieter section. So that's probably what I would do. Is to have it on two separate tracks, or you could automate the volume. But again, because GarageBand doesn't let you automate effects, it only lets you automate volume, which we won't rant about today, then that's going to be difficult. Oh, having fish for dinner on a submarine. Okay, sorry, I missed the fish part. That's sub bass, having fish for dinner on a submarine. Oh, bass. See, I'm really not clued in. It is 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning here. You're going to have to give me a small leave pass on that one. Yeah, and James Earl has said, yeah, possibly some volume automation. Yeah, agree. So volume automation, clip gain, which we talked about in this video as well, using a second track to adjust your effects on that second track. That would be what I would suggest for that. All right, we are we're heading towards the end here. So what are my final thoughts? So let's do a little bit of a Jerry Springer kind of moment. Well, no, sorry. I made you all think of Jerry Springer now. My final thoughts for mixing here in GarageBand, but mixing in general. So number one final thought is don't overthink it. This isn't rocket science. A lot of people will tell you how difficult it is, and you know the people who tell you how difficult it is, they're people that have spent 20 years learning how to do it and to perfect it, and let's try and be nice here. It's not that they don't want you to do it, but they want to validate how difficult it is to get a good mix. But let's reframe that. It is difficult to get an outstanding mix that's going to sell 1 million records. Agreed. Is it difficult to get a good mix of your track that you're going to be happy with to share with your family, friends, and even release? No, I don't think it is. I think it's about recording it well, getting it right at the source, like Joe Gilda says, getting it right at the source, recording it well, mixing it effectively using simple techniques, and then getting the best possible sound that you can out of your own music. So that is what you need to do to mix, and don't get caught up. You don't have to use anything. You heard just before that my original mix didn't sound a heck of a lot different to the second mix. And if they do, some types of music will sound very different, and that's okay too, but don't go overboard. And that brings me to the second and final point, which is keep it simple. Use the KISS method. If there's an easy way to do something and a hard way to do it, pick the easy way to do it. Don't add a whole bunch of extra tracks. Don't add a whole bunch of extra effects. The reason that I didn't go into detail about all the effects is I didn't really use a whole lot. And yes, this is an acoustic song. This is a folk song. It's not going to need a whole bunch in terms of processing. If you're doing EDM and trap music and all those other genres that I struggle to understand, then yeah, maybe you need to have your filters on there and you need to do all your things. But yeah, keep it simple. Do it as simple approach as you can. And this is why I love GarageBand. This is why I think if you're starting out, GarageBand is a great platform to use, because it is super simple to get up and running and get started. And yes, it has, as James pointed out, it has those frustrations as well. Because it is so simple, it makes it a little bit more difficult to do more advanced things sometimes, but it does the right thing for you. If you are a beginner, it can actually help you out. Okay, well, we're close to finishing up there. Thank you to Gino, who said thank you. Thank you to Kenneth, who gave me a shout out there. If you liked this video, throw a like on it. I don't ask for this sort of stuff very often, but it does just help out. It does help other people find the videos. And if you found some value in this content, if you've got other questions about it, drop a comment after the video too. All of the live chat comments here don't go into the comments. They go into their own separate one that you can replay, but they don't go into the comments. So if there's anything you wanted to say about the video, I would love it if after the video is published, you jump in and give me a comment, say hello, ask a question. If there was anything I missed in the questions here from the live folks, please re-ask it again in the comments. I'm always down there chatting away to you folks. So drop a comment down there. And yeah, if you want to support me in any other ways, you can find my music. Just search Pete Johns on any of your favorite streaming platforms, on any of your favorite music purchasing platforms. You can, of course, go to studiolivetoday.com, which is my home on the internet. That's got the 400 plus video tutorials and tips and tricks that I've produced over the last few years. You can get all of those there. You can also go to studiolivetoday.com/gear, which is my gear guide. So you can check out the gear that I use and recommend there. And you can go to studiolivetoday.com/merch if you want to buy a t-shirt. Because, yeah, I like my logo and I'm not wearing it today. But yeah, if you want to have something a bit interesting and have people go, what the heck is Studio Live Today? Then, yeah, pick yourself up a Studio Live Today t-shirt. All right, enough of the marketing. You can tell that I have a sales and marketing background. Enough of the marketing. Thank you genuinely to everyone who's been here in the live chat, to Darren, Patrick, James, Ponk80, Gino, Benedict, Gateflon, Bold Soja for Christ, Basil, Adea, there's a whole bunch more, Barry Smith, David M, Amarasea, ECBTV. Thank you to everyone. And if you're watching here on the replay, we do this every week, every Saturday afternoon in the US, it's Saturday evening in Europe and the UK, and it is Sunday in conveniently Sunday morning at 7 o'clock for anyone else who happens to be over here in Australia or in the Pacific. Thanks again to everyone for all of your support, and I will see you on the next video. Cheers.